TrevBeats show, TrevBeats show. TrevBeats show, TrevBeats show.
Welcome back to the TrevBeats show. Before I get started today, I just wanted to take this time to say thank you to everyone that's been supporting the channel. We really appreciate it. We see it, we feel it, and it's really helping us get this content out to everyone. So just wanted to say thank you for that to all the supporters and subscribers. Now, today's episode is very special. This person defined the 90s R&B, like just unbelievable amounts of hits consistently, and just a career that has spanned 30 plus years. An amazing, amazing, amazing guest. And before I get to the guest, I just want to say that sometimes it's important to hear from people's own words their story. So this interview, I'm really just a fly on the wall, just like you are. I'm letting the guest talk and give us from the beginning to now in his own perspective, in his own words, because sometimes we get caught up in the gear or the, certain details, which are important, but concepts and thought process and the reason why certain decisions were made, sometimes there's a lesson to be learned there that's intangible, and especially when it's coming directly from the source. So without further ado, let's get into our interview today with our guest, Bryan-Michael Cox.
Let's talk about music. Ooh, let's talk about music.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 7 of the TrevBeats show. This is a very special guest we have today. Not often do you get to interview someone that has had such a footprint on modern American music in multiple genres. And I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to get right to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, introducing to some and reintroducing to most, Mr. Bryan-Michael Cox.
What's up, Trev?
What's up, bro? How you doing, man?
Good, bro. Cannot complain, man. Just over here, getting it done. You feel me?
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, man. Obviously, man, we know each other, but I mean, way before that, I was listening to your music for decades, man, and it's just like amazing what you've been able to accomplish, musically, especially in so many different areas and with so many different artists spanning over so many different decades. I'd like to, for those of us that, that are watching, that are kind of new and don't really know the contribution, give me a little brief history of, just moving up to your first placement, like from beginning to the first time you got a record. Like, what does that look like?
Well, for me, I started kind of early, you know what I mean? Like my first, hit record happened when I was about like 19, 20. So there was a movement reaching up to that point, you know what I mean? From being, growing up in Houston, going to the high school performing visual arts, with my best friend Robert Glasper, with Jason Moran, Chris Daves of the world, Beyonce and LaToya came to our school with the, that pedigree of HSPVA is very, very dense at the crib, in Houston. And making the decision to move to Atlanta was, I either was going to New York because Rob was going to New York, I graduated high school already, and they were still like a year behind me. And when he decided to go to New York, I was like, well, I should go to New York. But then my girlfriend at the time was like, well, I'm moving to Atlanta. And I was like, Atlanta might be, a better place for me. And I was, I was in love, and I was like, Atlanta might be a better place for me. Ended up coming to Atlanta, and I hit the ground running. Like before I got to Atlanta, I had a mentor by the name of Greg Curtis, who also is a PVA graduate, but 10 years before I graduated. And he took me under his wing, my senior year of high school, and kind of like showed me, my way around the studio, showed me how to, literally using software because he was using, software at the time. He wasn't really using MPCs at the time. So I learned how to use software. Then I got a job at Guitar Center. At Guitar Center, I learned how to use a drum machine. You know what I mean? So there was a process leading up to me going to Atlanta. And when I got to Atlanta, I had the ground running. I had a lot of DATs and tapes. 2 years of making, beats and writing songs. I put all that into when I got to Atlanta. I had all this stuff. You know what I mean? Right. Some of it probably was usable, some of it probably wasn't. But the fact that I had all of this stuff, I was just like, yo, I'm ready to the ground run. I got these DATs, I got these tapes. Let me go, kick the pavement. And I'd signed the CSAC through my boy Trevor Gale, through Greg when I was 16, 17 years old.
Crazy.
I already had a PRO. And I tried to come to Atlanta and hit the ground running, and I realized early that I would have to. Really start from the bottom. Utilize my basic skills, my way, the fact that I knew my way around the studio, the fact that I could press record and play, the fact that I knew my way around a patch bay, the fact that I had to use those and say, okay, cool, even at that basic level, I got to be able to sweep the floor and get coffee, and what I'm saying.
So you didn't mind.
I just was like, you know what? I have one objective here, and the only objective is to get on. And if that means I have to sweep the floor, get somebody's coffee, be somebody's assistant, do what I got to do, I was willing to do the groundwork. You know what I mean? What you do when you're trying to advance in a proper way, not the right way. You show people that you're about their work. You show people that your work ethic is top tier. And between me going to college, being in the marching band, being in the jazz band in college, being in the choir in college, and still finding time to be all of this for this company and have a girlfriend and what I'm saying, like all these different things.
Balance,
The partners at Noontime, where I was doing a lot of my internship stuff, they were just like, yo, how's this guy getting all this stuff done during the daytime? And then and coming to work with us and then staying after to learn my way around MPC 3000, to learn my way around how to make records for real. It's one thing to be a musician, it's another thing to know how to make records. And I had a lot of just a lot of help along the way between Greg, and then of course when I got to Atlanta, Jazzy Faye, Teddy Bishop helped me, J-Dub. I had a lot of people who are signed to Noontime who actually kind of who embraced me early before I signed, before I even became a part of it. They were just like, look at this kid, like what is this kid? This kid, he's always here. He's still making good grades, and he's still doing band trips, and he's still doing, how is he doing all this? I just felt like it's 24 hours in a day. What am I doing with my day? You know what I mean?
Right.
And
that's crazy.
Eventually I ended up signing to Noontime, and I made a couple records that people, gravitated to early on. There was a group called Profile. I produced a remake of Overjoy for them. That was like my first big thing. I got a check for $10,000. I'll never forget. I never had $10,000. I was like, we rich, you know what I mean?
Was that the 90s? That would have been the 90s, right? So it meant a lot more.
98, 99, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and then and I was working, by that time I met Brian and Brandon Casey. So I was working with Jagged Edge. We were writing songs for other people, really. We were trying to be a writing team, and we were writing for the people. And it just ended up we ended up doing songs for what ended up being their album. You know what I mean? So initially, that was like a surprise. I didn't think I was going to make that album with them. I thought we were just writing songs for other people, and then it turned out we ended up making an album, and it worked out. You know what I'm saying? Right. And that's how I met Jermaine. That's how the whole thing started. They introduced me to Jermaine, and Jermaine was like, "Yeah, we're going to finish the album." I was like, "Finish an album?" And I thought that the JD thing was like a one-time thing. I didn't realize that we'd be here almost 30 years later. I thought that was like, okay, bring me in to do Jagged Edge, you know what I mean? And I'm gonna go back to Noontime and make my Noontime records. But it just worked out with me and him, just kept going. And at the same time, it's a group from Houston called Ideal. and I knew them well. You know, we all grew up together. Donnie Scantz was like one of my, he's my cousins, one of my best friends. You know what I mean? He was their music director, and so when that opportunity came, I just felt like we got to, I got to give them the best, the best songs to give them, and we gave them. Me and John wrote "Get Gone" for them, and it ended up being that was my first hit record. "Get Gone" was the first one.
Wow. Well, so I want to go back a little bit. So when you were in school and playing in all the bands, your primary instrument was piano, I take it?
Yes. So interestingly enough, Trevor, man, I started out, I always play piano, but I started out, I was singing, man. I thought I was going to be a singer. I thought I was going to be in the group. I thought I was trying to be like that hyphen, singer, producer, songwriter. I thought I was going to be Babyface or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And I was in groups. I thought I was going to be, I was trying to be like this hybrid of like Babyface and Teddy Riley. Like, I had groups. I was performing. I was singing in church. That's how me and Rob became so close instantly, because Rob was this, just dynamic piano player, young, and everybody knew who this kid was, on our side of town. And like this dynamic guy, And he came to PVA, and it was like, there was like folklore about him before he even came to the school. That's how dynamic he was. And naturally, we all became fast friends, close instantly. And Rob used to, play at churches. Rob was getting money early before we was getting money. Rob was making money. You know what I'm saying? And what he would do is he basically would have his own like set of singers that would come in, and sing, everywhere he played at. And I was a part of that situation. And on top of the fact that I also played, so then in a lot of cases I would get on keys while he's playing piano, or I would do, it would be that kind of situation. But initially, that's really, in my little circle, I always was going to be a producer. But I think my entry point was like, I'm singing, I'm in a group, I'm singing, I'm playing keys, I'm writing songs. It was always a thing like that. You know what I'm saying?
So I think that another thing that I took away from what you just said earlier was you didn't mind doing the work, that it took to at least keep you in the room and to show everybody, your integrity, your tenacity, and the fact that you were willing to work for it. You weren't looking for it overnight. You weren't trying to get some kind of flash in the pan. You were like, yo, I'm going to show y'all what I'm about. And I think that's something that we're starting to see go away in the generation, because everybody just wants the viral moment and this is it, and it's overnight. You know what I mean? So it's like you ended up, you're one of the most prolific songwriters that we've had in R&B music over these last 3 decades. And I think the connection that you just mentioned, a lot of people may not know that is actually, because we associate you with Atlanta so much, we don't know the Texas connection that also, birthed Robert and Chris and so many incredible people, and Erica and so many people from that soil. It doesn't get spoken about enough. You know what I mean?
I always talk about, and I always mention this part of the story. When I was in Houston, of course, we grew up with Beyonce, Kelly, LaToya, Latavia, we were all friends with them. You know what I mean? And it was just a small community of kids who were talented, sang and did all these different things or whatever. And I was always the person that was, I'm a producer, I'm a songwriter, and I would always bug them. You know what I mean? Beyonce and LaToya came to my school when they were freshmen, and I would bug them. And Beyonce called me one day. It was like, hey, man, you want to do a song for us? I told my dad, I want you to write a song for us. So, you and your guys to write songs for us. So we went, I went to Greg's studio. Greg had a studio. That's where I was, where I dwelled. And there was another mentor of mine named Teron Mitchell, and then a great friend of mine who passed away a while back named Scooby. And we basically like this, we were trying to be this writing team. And this was like our first, endeavor into that world as a team. You know what I mean? Right. And we with 2 songs. The title one time was called Hey DJ. The other song was called Sweetie Pie. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget being in those couple days or sessions, and that being the moment saying, okay, no, I don't want to be an artist. You know what I mean? Like, I was at that point It was like, I want to be, I want to be in groups. Up until that point, I was doing all of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was the moment it was like, oh, no, I want to produce records.
Wow.
Like, I mean, I've always wanted to produce records, but it was like, no, I want to produce records for me and for my group before. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like, nah, being an artist and doing that, they got something that I don't have. And I recognize it. You know what I mean? Early. I recognize it, like, as artists, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As artists. And they were younger than us, you know what I mean? And I recognized that. I was like, oh, they have something I don't have. I don't have the will to be like them, but I do know what I want to do. And I never forget, that was the moment. It was like, I couldn't have been no more than 17, 18 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was the moment. It was like, okay, think about the 90s, right? It was a lot of young groups like Subway and H-Town. It was a lot of, especially early 90s, and ABC and,
SWV.
SWV, all these groups that were young. So when you're a young person coming up in that era and you have a talent, you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna do that. I want to be like Blackstreet. I want to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just realized, like, in that moment, I was like, oh, they have something that is special. And that's what artists look like. That's what an artist looks like. Okay, my job is to help artists get to the finish line. I realized that day. And I always tell people, like, that was the day that it clicked for me. Like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going after this. I'm either moving to New York or moving to LA. I'd already started making up on my mind the things I was going to do after that. You know what I'm saying?
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I mean, obviously it was the right decision and you followed your heart. But another takeaway from that is that you didn't allow your ego to overtake you to say, nah, I'm still going to go for it. It's like, you was like, you know what? They have something incredible. I may not have that, but I have this, and I'm gonna follow this. I mean, some people may have that feeling, and they ego makes them not take that route. So the humility in that decision also speaks to how that you've helped define modern R&B, across multiple areas. It wasn't a flash in the pan. That skill got you a whole career. So from your vantage point, what do you, now, having gone through so many records and so many processes since then, what separates records that last from records that are just a flash in the pan that's like a trend? You've had a long career that has lasted. So, when it comes to music and records, how do you, what separates records that you like, okay, this is going to be a classic versus, this is flavor of the week? What do you think about that?
I think that a lot of times, I guess what I've learned over the years is that it's language, right? I feel like, of course, we know certain sounds come and go.
Right.
We know that, right? But I think ultimately what has been our main, like, anchor, you know what I'm saying, is language. Even when we have used things that put a timestamp on it, right? Like, it may be a song that says that, looking at my beeper or something like that. That may, you know what I mean? It may have a
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Stilo or something. Yeah.
But it's how you use it. And I think in our case, what's happened is when we hadn't, I know when I approached writing, we hadn't used a lot of that timestamp language. There is some threaded through there. Sometimes you may listen to an old Usher record and be like, oh, you may talk about a cell phone, you may talk about it, something like that. But we didn't really lean. It wasn't like the name of the song wasn't two-way. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's maybe threaded in there, and you look back on it, and it's nostalgic for certain people. Some kids who may like the record now may not know what we're talking about. You know what I mean? But I always said it's language. Like I'm not going to talk about. We try to talk about things that are timeless, topics that are timeless, topics that are going to always be topics. We know that love is always going to be a topic. We know breakup is always going to be a topic. We know that there's always going to be some social commentary in there that's going on. There's certain things, and it's how do you talk about it? What's the language? You know what I mean? And you don't want to date it. You don't want to say, okay, yeah, like we wearing, Yeezys and this, that, and the third. But now it sounds crazy if somebody listens to a song and you know 2015 somebody was talking about they was wearing their Yeezys. Not
Right.
saying that it's just even people still may wear Yeezys, but they don't talk about it. Like it timestamps it. That's where it stops being, you know,
timeless. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
It's
got
like,
you.
you have to get into a space where you talk about current fashions and stuff like that, but still just don't. I wouldn't, you know, like there was a time about, you know, red monkey jeans were a thing back in like '05 or some, you know, like,
Right.
you know, whoever rapped about or sang about red monkey jeans is finished in 2020. You know what I mean?
You ain't even trying to hear that. You like, what the hell?
I don't know what that is. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know,
Yeah.
but like for example, what we did with Money Long, the way, you know, Priscilla, we did Made for Me. The way that she incorporated the term twin. You know, twin is like Atlanta slang, which turned into, you know, now worldwide slang. And twin is, you know, twin is very, very 2023, 2022 for Atlanta. You know what I mean? But now it's, you know, and that was like just a thing. Nobody, you know, it's not like, I don't think it's ever going to get old. I think she made it a thing that now that's just a thing. Like twin, that's my twin. And twin, where have you been? I just think that's now part of our culture's vernacular. You know, sometimes that happens too. Once you take a word and then it becomes like permanent. You know what I'm saying? Like fresh.
I saw that recently. Yeah, recently a friend, and it's not even in music, but a friend of mine is actually on the team at that place called Destination Smokehouse. That's a barbecue spot. And Mr. Walter now has come with tendernism, and now I'm hearing that all over the place. You know what I'm saying?
You know what I'm saying? And now it's almost like now it's certain things become permanent, and I think that is a great example of what that is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we should write that record, man. We should write a tendernism record. So, you know, this first season of my show, my through line is AI, and you know, I call it the big elephant in the room because so much has happened just in the last 90 days. It's just unbelievable. So 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 many writers and producers now they're trying to navigate it, right? You know, like just the whole use case of AI, you know, the speed, and then just in general, we're inundated with so much. It's just like content overload. You know, like you're hearing about new AIs every day. I use this one, use Suno, use Music, GP. You know, it's just like So, what skills do you think are going to be non-negotiable for the next generation of hit makers? Do you think AI is going to be, hey man, you better use it or you're not going to win? Or, you know, where do you think it's going from your vantage point?
My vantage point, Trev, I am highly concerned. Okay. Because I heard something the other day. So before maybe I got asked this question like a month and a half ago. I was on Lou Will's podcast and I got asked the question, and my response was, I don't think that I think that human interaction trumps all of it. I feel like, you know, the humanness of what these records that we make, how it makes people feel is that's what trumps it. But then I heard something. I'm talking. This is yesterday. Something.
Yeah.
Where it was like it's this page, right? Where it's like old vinyl. It's called old vinyl type. Some.
I think I know what
just
you're talking about.
Came across. I'm about to say exactly because I had to save this clip. Like, yo, this is crazy.
Yeah.
It's called. Hold on. I'm about to tell you. Whatever it is, right? I think I lost it. Whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, it was like a 19. It felt like 1983 Kashif, like Boogie, you know, like Boogie meets Leon Silver's vibe, and it was no, you know what it felt like. No, I got a better example. It felt like Jimmy and Terry in the early '80s. It felt like Alexander O'Neal, and it was some stupid title like, you know, you something about my PP and your poo poo or something like that, some stupid shit.
Right.
I was so thrown off on how good it sounded.
Right.
I mean, music, the AI vocal, it's like, what is like? So for me, I am concerned. Okay, because of course you have your basic level with the prompt. You know what I mean? Somebody, people don't really understand the concept of prompting yet. The average person doesn't. It's just very basic prompts, right? But then you have people who are high level, people who are really into tech, who really understands this thing, who got the knows what to put in that prompt to make it do what it needs to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And that is, I'm concerned about it. Not even everybody was concerned about Napster, and everybody was concerned about when every change. There's always high concern when it went from albums and tapes to CDs.
Sure.
Everybody was upset.
Right.
From CD to MP, the LimeWire and Napster, we had to adjust. I don't know how. I think the only way you adjust is to just really grasp an understanding of it fully. Like, I'm in a space where I want to learn every aspect of it. I want to learn everything about AI. You know what I'm saying? From ChatGPT, to whatever people are developing. I want to learn everything about it. I think people jumped on Timberland because I think your knee-jerk reaction was like, oh, he's assimilating to AI. He's a And I think also because of the guy, who actually made the beat, that was really most of the problem, right?
Right.
But you have to ask yourself, like, is he on to something at this point? Is he beating everybody to the punch? Because we still over here holding on, hoping that AI ain't what we know AI really is.
Well, I'm glad you have that sentiment because, I think Timberland, the thing about what Timberland's doing, I think people are tripping out that it's an actual artist. Like, that side of it is still kind of tripping. But I'm gonna tell you, I did a whole full AI album a year and a half ago. And I was just trying to mark the time and the technology since then to now and how good it sounds and all that. It's mind blowing, right? As you sit, yeah. And I have thousands of things that I've been doing, to really try to develop a sound and develop and see what my prompt. And then Suno allowed you to upload. See, that's the thing where we have a different advantage because one of the greatest use cases I've seen is reimagining old ideas. Bro, you put an old track in there and then you prompt it and it might spit out another section or another groove, dude, that is a use case that songwriters like yourself will, because I have a philosophy. If you're dope before AI, you're going to be dope after. It's not going to take anything away from a creative, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, so it's like, we could talk offline about that because I'm way into figuring out a use case that's not intrusive and it's not, 100%. We're not 100%. First of all, the PROs allow you to register now, but that's still partial AI. But you can register as of like the end of October, partial AI songs. Yeah, so, but it's not full. So as a result of this AI thing, and this was even happening almost because of the internet, like social media, but you've also seen the shift from artist development to data-driven signings. And now it's even more. We started seeing that in the YouTube days. So what do you think now? We've probably had, 10 to 15 years of that energy of people getting signed off of numbers. I'll say a good 10 years. Do you think anything has been lost in that translation or has something been gained in that translation?
No, I think that wow, that's a good question because I think that it's both. You know what I mean? Ironically, I know we can't have it both ways all the time, but I think it was both. I think that we've lost the quality of artist development. So we're losing superstars, like people who are like, outside of the people that we do see as superstars, like the SZAs and like, people like that. Yeah, they're developed. People don't know that art, she comes from, even though she's younger than all of us, but she comes from a camp that believes in artist development, the Kendrick Lamar's, the breaks, these artists are developed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So look at our stars, right? It's like the younger ones, they are developed. The ones that are just popping out, having hit records here and there, left or right, it's like nobody's sticking like that. It's like everybody's attention span is so short. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to the majority of this music, if something sticks, most likely it's an artist that has been through the ringer. Most likely it's an artist that can tour. Most likely it's an artist that, you know what I mean? If something sticks, like even if we say on all sides, like a Taylor Swift or anything that sticks is usually an artist that is developed and that can tour and that can really go crazy live. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think Doechie's a good example of that too. And she let everybody know her journey. It wasn't overnight. You know what I'm saying?
She's a great. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that when you get into a space of that, then we'll start seeing some more superstars and people leaning that. But I feel like think about what was coming up, man. Like especially as kids in the '80s and then growing up as teenagers and young adults in the '90s. Like, bro, like we had everybody from Babyface, who was selling out arenas, to Luther Vandross, to Jodeci, to Boys to Men. I'm talking about that 20-year span from 1980 to 2000. You know what I mean? Like it was so many people selling, multi-platinum. You know what I mean? Selling. It was, gold was like a joke at some point. After a while, it was like, gold was like, you know what I mean?
Right. You're like, it's platinum in a week. We went platinum overnight. Like, you know what I mean?
It was a level of, it was a level of attachment to the music that I think that we've lost as a society, right? So you think about the experience that we had coming up, having to save your money, or if your mama gave you $20 to go to the mall on the weekend or whatever, and you go to the mall, you got $20 to be at the mall all day. All you got is $20. That means you got to eat. If you buy something, you got $20. You know what I mean? You could eat. I could pick up either an album or pick up a CD or pick up a couple of cassette singles or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and the experience of going to get the record, like waiting for the record, like going to either a Tower or a Sound Warehouse or a Sound Waves or a Sam Goody and asking when is the new such and such comes out. You think it's out because you heard it on the radio, and you go to the store and it's not out for another 2 weeks. And it says it's coming out next, what New Music Day used to be, Tuesdays back in the day?
Yeah, Tuesday.
2 Tuesdays from now. Okay, cool. So you waiting 2 weeks, you know what I mean, to go get that new, you save your money because it's going to cost, the CD's going to cost $12, $10 to $12. So you save a little money, go to the record store. Hopefully they got it still in stock. Hopefully it's not sold out.
Right.
Because if it's sold out, then you're stuck. But hopefully get there, go to the record store. Pull your money out, pay for it. So the gratification of having your own dollars and paying for something that you actually like, your own taste, not your mama's taste, not your brother's taste, something that you like. I like this new D'Angelo song. I'm going to go buy Brown Sugar, the album. This is my CD. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. That's the difference.
You purchase it. The plastic's on it. You open up the plastic. Even before you get home, you can put it in. Open up the plastic. Me, I'm a credit reader. Open up the plastic. Pull out the insert. Read the credits. Who wrote what? Lyrics is in there. I mean, we were automatically attached to the experience. It was a whole experience before you even pop the CD in. You know what I mean?
Wow, yeah.
Where what streaming has done, which like I said, you have to adjust for the times. I'm not ever trying to bash, an era, man. No, what era, whatever. It is what it is. This is the era we live in. It's the era that I'm getting paid in. We got to do, right?
Yeah.
But the streaming era, there's no real anticipation. There's no you do everything on your phone. So it's not special. The streaming service is $10 a month. You don't get to, it's not like you are saving money to go get a record. The record shows up on your phone. You can listen to it if you want to. You can watch the video if you want to. It's not everything about it. everything about how we consume music was an experience. Even back in the day, you watch MTV before BET was even popping, because BET wasn't everywhere. Like we didn't get BET in Houston until like, the late 80s, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Mid to late 80s, you know what I mean? So it's like, but even then it was other programming. So MTV was the only place, MTV and VH1 was the only place you could get videos all day long. You know what I mean? So you're waiting for your favorite video. In the process of you waiting for your favorite video, you're discovering new music. You're discovering Duran Duran. You're discovering, you know what I'm saying? Culture Club. You're discovering Tears for Fears. You're discovering Wham. You're discovering, music that I probably wouldn't normally listen to if I have control of what I want to listen to. But I'm watching MTV waiting for the new Run DMC video. You know what I'm saying? or whatever. And while you're waiting for this video, you're learning about The Clash, you're learning about Blondie, you're learning about, you know what I mean? All this different kind of music you probably would have never listened to. That's still part of the experience that I feel like we have become detached from. You know what I'm saying?
I 1000% agree. And the other thing that's interesting, correlation wise, is basically when it was units and we were buying units, that always, there was never one of those artists you mentioned that sold a lot of records that couldn't fill up an arena. And now that it's streams, you can have all these crazy amount of streams and be popular, and you can't fill up an arena.
Can't fill up a club.
House of Blues, you know what I mean? And instead of the experience that we did that you just described, right? That was the original unboxing. So now that experience is staged and it's a whole produced thing that is garnering the same experience that we used to get naturally. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's just a crazy way things have changed around, where technology has made it super convenient, but it's also made us more detached, and it's just it's an interesting place, man. So that being said, if you were like in a room of young producers, what's the one truth you would tell them about how to have longevity in the industry? Like, now that you've been in this industry 30 plus years, what would you tell a young producer right now in the age of AI and all that, if he wants to now make this a career? What would you tell him about having longevity?
It is super cliche, but like, I've been in this business almost 30 years and I've been nobody but myself. You know what I mean?
Bar.
I've never tried to be anybody. I never looked at, you know what I mean? I came up in the era of Kanye and the era of, the Neptunes, and the era of Rodney Jerkins, and the era of Rich Harrison, and the era of, all these great producers. And I never looked at one of them and said, I want that. I never looked at Kanye and was like, Kanye's a big star. I want to be a big star. I got more hit records than he do as a producer. Why I'm not bigger than him? I never looked at, I never compared. I just never compared. It's kind of like, I feel like my longevity in this business and my relationships, the reason why I've been able to be in this business so long is because I am who I am, and people in this business like me, and I'm a person that really just I stay out the way. I try to stay true to the shit that I like. You know what I'm saying? And I remember Rick Rubin. I watched an interview with Rick Rubin. He was saying that being a producer is really, credited to your taste, my taste. Like I never compromised my taste. You know what I'm saying? What I like, that's what I go after. You know what I mean? I don't try to emulate nobody else. What I like, that's what I go after. And I think that is, and stand next to it. There was an era when R&B wasn't, contemporary R&B wasn't popping. There was an era when, there was a drought. I went through a real drought. When Eminem was popping, when hip hop was no. I went through a real drought. Luckily for me and, my collaborators, we made a lot of big records early on. So we made staples, and those staples sustain us. You know what I'm saying? I didn't sell off my publishing. I didn't, So I was able to sustain during the drought. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. there was a point in time when, you know, contemporary R&B was being redefined, and there was some years where there was just nothing, you know, no labels wanted to touch it. No labels wanted, you know, we couldn't get no work. You know, I had people telling me I needed to start making, you know, because I was DJing too. So people telling me, well, since you're DJing, you should start making EDM records. I'm like, so I'm trying to make EDM records. You know what I mean? Like that was the only time that I tried to do something that was not innately who I am. Granted, you know what I mean? I could appreciate it. I could appreciate Swedish House Mafia. I could appreciate it, Max Martin. I could appreciate, you know what I mean? I could appreciate, you know, everything that was happening. Marshmello. I could appreciate, you know, what everybody was doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't make that kind of music. You know what I mean?
That's
I
not
try.
you.
Like it's cool. And what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna rebrand my whole thing. And, you know, I mean, some people can do that. You know, Lil Jon was able to rebrand, you know, from what he was doing to EDM. You know, but crunk and EDM actually has a lot of similarities, whether you know, when you break it all the way down, you know what I'm saying? And he was a personality.
Well, that's it. I mean, yeah, your record is what made him.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So for me, that was the only point of reference I had. I'm like, well, man, I love going to Vegas and kicking it. You know, I'm hearing it. You know, I love being in the environment. But I mean, right now, like I said, as a DJ, like on my DJ laptop, you know, I have a whole EDM set that I will never ever use. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? It's not my bag. You know what I mean? It's like it, you know, never was my bag like that. You know what I mean? So I think that's the only time I could reference where I tried to assimilate to something that wasn't naturally something that I could get with. I could do it, but it didn't feel right. And it didn't, I couldn't sell it. It didn't feel right even trying to sell it. You know what I mean? It just felt like, what the hell am I doing here? You know what I'm saying? So
but that's important, bro. Authenticity, man. Authenticity.
So I would say no matter what tools you're using, whether it's, you know, whether you're in here like I am with drum machines and keyboards everywhere, or whether you are using a laptop, whether you use an iPad. You know, my son's making beats on his laptop and his iPad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're utilizing AI. You know, whatever you're doing, just be original and be authentic to yourself. You know what I mean? I feel like, you know, I look up and I look at all the things that's happened in the past, I'll say 5 years, really. But this year's been really incredible with like the acknowledgement, right? Like the kind of acknowledgement I've been getting, like the Billboard acknowledgement, you know, all the things I've been getting. I just look at it and I'm like, man, I'm so glad I didn't like I was able to stay true. You know what I mean? And have hit records now that really still reflect who I am and reflect the, you know, the movement I started in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you could play a record that I produced from, you know, back in the day, and play a record that I, you know, produced today and say there's a common thread, and it sounds newer, it feels newer because I understand how to do that. You know what I'm saying? But there's a common thread, like, okay, there's a bridge from, you know, 1998 to 2026 or 27. There's a bridge, and I haven't really diverted from that bridge, and I've been able to be the same, you know, evolve creatively, but be the same foundationally. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think right now we're going to take this time right now, and I'm going to, you know, familiarize everyone with some of the records that you've worked on, because I think a lot of our audience knows, but some of our audience is new, and I want them to understand the scope and the influence that these records have provided over several generations.
So, like, I guess early on, you could say, you know, like I said, Get Gone was my first, you know, hit record with Ideal. And then I went right into Jagged Edge's second album. The album was called J Heartbreak, which is probably, I would say that is the album that actually put me on the map. Like, okay, you know, I made Get Going. It was a hit record, but for anybody back then, you could have one, you know, hit record, and then it's like you have a moment, and if you know, either you could do it again, you may not do it again, whatever, right? Because I know a lot of people who made records that year who didn't make no more records after that. You know what I'm saying? So I can say that the J Heartbreak, me connecting with Jermaine and making, him allowing me to make that record with him. J Heartbreak is the album that actually I feel like put me on everybody's radar. Like everybody in the music industry was like, I remember we did used to be this convention called Impact back in the day.
Sure.
And the Impact convention, and we have this is the same time Jagged Edge was coming out, Destiny Child was coming out, Writings on the Wall. So Columbia was cross promoting both albums, right? So I remember Jermaine was like, "Yo, I need you to come to Impact because they're doing a Columbia Records luncheon, and we're doing basically a showcase of this new album, and I need you to be there, whatever." Well, cool. So I remember going to the luncheon, and I just remember the first time people started recognizing that who I was, executives started knowing, oh, that's the guy, that's the little guy, that's Jermaine's little guy, or that's Noontime little, it was like that was the first thing. That was almost like a coming out party for me in the industry. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, bet. I remember that being like the album that put me on the map. So when that album is Let's Get Married, He Can't Love You, Promise. And then from there, it just kind of snowballed. I did Tony Braxton, Just Be a Man About It, Aaliyah's Come Over. It just started going, going. I made a lot of records. I did Little Most. I did Little Most Forever. I did Superwoman Part 1, and then I just started moving, kept moving. Next thing you know, we're doing Mariah. I did a few albums with Mariah and Jermaine. We did Charm Bracelet. We did Rainbow, Charm Bracelet, and then leading up to Emancipation. So Emancipation, I did Shake It Off and Can I Get Your Number? And then all this stuff is happening. I meet a young Chris Brown. I produce Chris Brown. We do Confessions first. I do Confessions first. So
that's the one, bro.
Usher, Jermaine, do 8701. We do Confessions. And then I meet a young Chris Brown. And I make Chris Brown's album, and then from there, the Mary thing happens, and then that happens. Next thing you know, everything just kind of it's so many records at that point. And then I did Making a Band because I did. Everybody talks about Day 26 and Danny Kane, so I was a major part of that. And then Monica, I was a major part of helping Monica and Jermaine and all of us get to the finish line. Just so many records off the top of my head, I can't really think of all of them. You know what I'm saying? But like I said, you fast forward through, you work through, and then you get to, us collaborating with Usher again on Don't Waste My Time, which was when ended up going platinum. And then from there, Ari Lennox's Pressure, which ends up going platinum. And then, so now we're in this new era of how records are received. And we're still trying to figure out how that works, you know what I'm saying? Because we're from a different era, you know what I mean? How records get rated and consumed and all that. Ari's record comes out and becomes a hit, and then we have this opportunity to work with Money Long. I've known Money for a long time when she was another artist on Capitol Records, and back in the day she's hit songwriter for a bunch of people, and she did her thing with Hours and Hours, blew up, and then now she had a few hit singles in between, and then we do Made for Me, and Made for Me sat for like a year. And then they brought it back out. I was like, yo, we want to put it out. They put it out, and then it became this big this big hit. You know what I mean? So it's not to mention all the other projects in between. Me producing, Robert Glasper, me producing, you know what I'm saying? All these things happening in between. So it's I would say from Ideal to now, to Ari Lennox's new joint, you know what I mean? It's to be still making records at this level. So I just worked on Walker's album. Of course, I'm a consultant at LBRN, so I'm helping them, still. I'm just excited to still be in the game. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And it's an inspiring thing. Even for me launching my own artist, I have an artist named Jack Freeman. I put a project on him last year, album called Nina, that it's been received very well. We got a Christmas album out. So I'm just I'm in constant constant motion. On top of that, me having the #1 R&B party in the Southeast, the Ladies of R&B, which is a whole nother thing.
Wow.
Which is an extension of my DJing culture thing.
Talk about that. Tell me about that. I'm not hip because I'm not out there. Tell me about that.
So we have a party called Ladies of R&B. It's actually, we did Vegas because we were doing Usher's after party. So that brand was the official after party for his Vegas residency. So Ladies of R&B, we did Vegas in Toronto, but in Atlanta, we are like the #1 party in Atlanta. It's really, really a blur, really, because how we started kind of like in the middle of the drought, in the middle of the R&B drought. We started this party. Because I think about it, there were R&B parties popping up everywhere, like Do-Over and like, Everyday People. They've been around, for a couple of years by the time we came on the scene. But these parties were like, quarterly parties, or of course they would travel, and so you would probably catch an Everyday People party once a year in Atlanta, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was like not as consistent in the city. And I was off DJing these parties. I would go do, people with MoMA. I would go Do-Over. I would go do these random parties. That's got for a minute. That's how I was paying my bills. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I remember I had this DJ agent at CAA tell me, Brian, you're doing these parties. You should do a party in Atlanta. Like, come up with a concept and do a party in Atlanta. And I was like, I don't want to do no party in Atlanta. I wasn't trying to be no promoter, right? But then my partner Keith Thomas, around the same time I got this advice, he was already like brewing up an idea. And his girl was working at this club called SL. My boy Mr. Ruggs owned the spot. And Ruggs asked her if Keith wanted to throw a party. And Keith was like, sure. The only person I'd do a party with is B. Cox. And that's how it started. You know what I'm saying? He was like, if I do it, the only person I'm going to do it with is B. Cox. Because we had been talking about it, but really didn't know how we were going to execute it, what we were going to do. So we started. The first one was, very, very light. But the people that was there was proper. It was Jermaine. It was Carrie Hilson. It was Usher. It was, you know what I mean?
Right.
All the right people from Atlanta that was at the party. It was like maybe 30 of us, but it was a great party. We had people come out and take pictures. Social media, the power of social media. Once people started seeing the pictures, it was all there last Wednesday. We going next one. So about a month later, we was packed. You know what I mean? We were pretty much ever since. And, we're expanding. So I did a partnership with Live Nation. So we were doing, Buckhead Theater. We're going to take it around to different venues, you know what I mean? And kind of take, the concept of what we do in the club and kind of expand it in bigger venues and theaters. So, and bringing artists with us in the whole nine. So
that's crazy, man. Well, that culture too is, bigger on that side of the country. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's killing. And I know there's a whole line dance culture in Texas that's going crazy, all over the place. So that, and it's also speaking to the fact that here you are, despite all the, accolades and all the records, and you've done all that and you produce and all that, but you're still DJing. And to me, that's almost like somebody that, is a songwriter, producer, and still will go out on the road. It's like, we don't have to not do it. It doesn't make you cooler if you don't do everything that you can do. It's like, why not? You know what I mean? Like, why not
for me,
be 360? Yeah.
For me, it's helped me. It's helped me stay relevant in the drought. You know what I mean? I felt like I felt the drought more than anybody else. Like I felt it more than people thought I felt it. You see what I'm saying? Like I feel like I talk about this drought and people look at me like, what drought? You didn't have a drought. You know what I mean? I think a lot, but I think a lot of that has to do because I really, really leaned in on DJing. I would pop up places and DJ. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would just pop up like, yo, I got my laptop. Let me do an hour. And that's kind of how I got really, especially in New York, the early 2010s, like the late, like 09 to like 2013. I would just pop up on people like Mel DeBarge and pop up on DJ MOS and DJ Kiss and pop up on Ruckus and pop up. I would go to New York and just pop up. You know what I'm saying? And be like, no, we're doing an hour. D Nice. That's how me and D Nice became really, really close because I would just pop up and be like, yo, Derek, man, go take a break, man. You ain't got to pay me. I'll do an hour. And because they knew that I was good. You know, it was like, well, I'm not gonna stink the party up.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
That's big. That's big.
That's how I feel like that really helped a lot, and forging those relationships along the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really helped me a lot, and I was able to use my star power as a producer to get in those spaces,
right?
And trust, because I would be Cox, he make hit records, we could trust him. And that's kind of how I leaned into that culture. Like, okay, yeah, you can trust me. You know, now I do it for free. Word. Right. And that's smart. That's how I feel like those moments really sustained me. And then that's what I carried back with me to Atlanta. That's how I started doing parties like the Groove and doing, in Atlanta, I went down to the, Ponce, I went down to East Atlanta, and I was doing parties there. You know what I mean? I was DJing Martina McFly and DJing with, the Work Crew and DJ Mars and Wally Sparks, all these cats who, it wasn't the mainstream Atlanta crowd. This was a different crowd. And because a lot of them couldn't believe I was down there, like, what are you doing down there? You're Bryan-Michael Cox, you know what I'm saying? But I was like, I want to party with y'all. This is the fun over here.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is what I feel like would sustain me during an era where I felt like we weren't really getting a lot of attention in contemporary R&B.
It reminds me, it's akin to a cat that's, playing at, whatever the biggest jazz club is, on a residency. And then when he ain't playing on the nights off, they take their instrument and go sit in somewhere. You know what I mean? It keeps your name going. It keeps you relevant, or, cats that just stay out there. It's like once, the familiarity thing is the through line through our whole industry. So it's like, that's huge, man. And I think that once again, it's a choice that maybe you didn't have to do it, but the reality is you were humble enough to do it because you had already had a name and amassed all this success, but you still felt like you were relatable enough. And I think people respect that and they love that. So before we get out of here, I always ask this question, man. I love this conversation, man. I'm learning a lot. Matter of fact, I didn't never know we were on anything together. I co-wrote my Saving Grace. So we on Charm Bracelet together. but like when you zoom out over everything, all the hits, all the awards, all the eras, all the relationship, what's one moment or memory that still stands out defining your career? I know that moment in the studio was one, but give me a moment that's like just defined. You'll never forget that moment. It stayed with you.
I would say the Be Without You moment. I feel like even in the process of making the record, having to navigate, me and my manager, Chris Hicks is a great navigator, but me learning how to navigating Jimmy Iovine, navigating Hindu, navigating Ron Fair, who was the chairman of Geffen at the time, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
This one song there was so many different pieces to the puzzle that I'm still getting pieces. You know what I mean? Like I posted the other day, and it was somebody from Ron's team. I didn't mention. I didn't know that he was a part of Ron's team. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know. Like I was talking to Ron. I wasn't talking. You know what I mean? So I'm still getting pieces of the puzzle. But I think that moment in general, because there was something that happened in Atlanta with me that triggered that, that triggered, you know what I'm saying? It was the fallout that happened that triggered that moment. And I think that moment for me is probably one of the biggest moments, because I remember when I got the record back, I was in New York working with Joe. I was at Zomba at Battery Studios in New York.
Sure.
I just sat with, I just saw them sign T-Pain. Like I was in the meeting when T-Pain got signed, right? And I went upstairs to the studio. Akon and Boo, who and Divine, who had T-Pain, they all came up. And I got the record back. Yeah, but we were doing passes back and forth. I got the record back. I said, y'all let's listen to this Mary record. I want y'all opinion. I remember playing the record for them and everybody just being like, yo, that shit is crazy. And I remember the feeling that I got, in the room was like, I don't know, I'm doing well now. I'm making money. I got hits. I'm doing well. But I was like, this song is going to change it. Like I felt that. You know what I'm saying? I was like, everything that was around it, everything that was leading up to it. I was like, this song's going to change it. It's going to shift everything. This is going to make me a household name. And then on top of that, what Mary did for me as an artist, right? She did something that no other artist had done before for me. Because I was always a guy in the shadows. I was always a guy that, even if I made a hit record, I made hit records. A lot of artists didn't go like sit on the One Park couch and say, my name. It wasn't like producer driven. You know what I mean? It was like I make my hits. They get on TV and they would, thank everybody else but me, and it'd be, be cool. I didn't really care though. At that point it was like I was making my money. I was always that Billboard. I was reading that Billboard like I was addicted to Billboard during that era. You know what I'm saying? Because I just wanted to see my name at the top of the charts. You know what I mean? So it didn't. That was gratification for me. But Mary going on every major platform, from MTV to BET to Entertainment Tonight to, everywhere she went regarding that song, right? She always said Bryan-Michael Cox and John T. Austin. She won her Grammy. Bryan-Michael Cox and John T. Austin. For me, I feel like for us, that shifted everything. Like when that type of name recognition, when that type of artist on that caliber gives you that type of name recognition in that era, because this was before social media. There was no such thing as social media.
Yeah.
So it made all the executives, it made everybody, first it made the world look at us different. It made the world know us, know our names at least. And then all the executives turned all the way up. Like literally, we were getting song deals out of nowhere. You know what I'm saying? Because it was just kind of like Mary said it, like Bryan-Michael Cox. And all of a sudden after that, artists I've been working with for almost 10 years at that point, now everybody want to start saying my name. So I saw the difference when an artist actually, shouts you out and stamps you and says, yo, this is the guy, or these are the guys.
Right.
You know what I mean? I saw that. I finally saw the value in that because I had never experienced it. Mary was the first artist to do that for me.
Well, that's huge, man. That's huge. I mean, and I know we're going to get out of here, but you also mentioned something that we have to talk about, the other side of it, which is quickly, a lot of times now because of the streaming and we don't get our credit, and it's not visible and it's not seen, what I mean? And so I've seen, we've seen several instances of them trying to get it right. They're some form is, they're trying to get it right, but it's definitely not like the old days when you can just, look on something and see it and know who did what. You know what I mean? So,
like I said, like for me, it didn't really matter because I knew that if an executive was reading Billboard, they knew it was clear. You see the name, you see the title of the song, right under the song, it's the writers and the producers.
Sure. Yeah, true.
Clear as day. Now, what I see now happening, which I do kind of appreciate now, is that because they're giving credits on these DSPs now, people are like snapshotting they're making those posts now. Like we're making the credit posts, which I think is cool, but I'm telling you, having an artist sit on a couch with a #1 record, #1 on the R&B charts, #2 on the Hot 100, and saying your name on Entertainment Tonight or on I guess for now it would be like on, if you're on like Complex or if you're on whatever, like whatever media, whatever's the media of the day, to have an artist speak your name in that way, and an artist of that caliber, like I said, Mary J. Blige is huge.
That's you can't. That currency is, you just can't get anything more than that. That validation, that's like the level. You know what I mean? That's a dream. Most people dream of getting that type of validation from an artist because what we do so many times just goes, it's backstage. You know what I mean? Yeah. But man, listen, I so appreciate you coming on the show, man, and giving us your time and all this wisdom, man, and insight, man. And, I don't, we got so much information, man. I may have to break this up. I don't know. You know, I like the long form. You know what I'm saying? And you know, my viewers are, you know, they like the long form stuff. So we might just let this go, but we might have to get back again and talk next season, because there's definitely gonna be some kind of updates with AI. You know, from now to then. You know what I mean? So it's like
I mean. Things have changed in the past 30 days. It's crazy.
So crazy, you know. And but yeah, man. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Bryan-Michael Cox. You know, I just gotta give you your props, man. Yeah, man. I appreciate you, bro. I really appreciate you, my brother.
Yes, sir.
And you know, there it is. Well, all good. It's amazing to hear people's stories from their own mouth. You know, their own perspective. You really get an insight that you can't get when you hear it third party. You know, someone speaking to you about how and why they made certain decisions, and then we see what it led to. So I feel like there was a lot of takeaways in this interview, namely one thing that you might hear in common with some of the other interviews we've done, which is not afraid to do the work, just not afraid to do the work from an early age, showing people at the studio, yeah, you're talented and you have music, but you're also willing to go get coffee if you have to, if that's what it takes. That time doesn't last forever, but it's also a time to show people your character. And I think anytime people have a situation where they can do that, I think it's very important. Too many times now, people are waiting for a viral moment or overnight success, and that's great if it can happen. But I still think the good old-fashioned work your way up when you know you have the goods is almost a surefire way to be successful. Once again, head over to TrevorLawrenceJr.com. That's where we have our merch and some software, and my book is there, The Musician's Pocket Guide to Endorsements, Volume 3. It also helps this channel when you support us over there and helps us bring more content, so we appreciate that. Now, let's talk about the next show. Manny Marroquin is one of the greatest mix engineers of our time. He has mixed hundreds of records, dare I might say thousands, but just every genre you can imagine he has mixed. I'm sure he's mixed plenty of records for Bryan-Michael Cox, every producer you can imagine. You can't not work with Manny because he is the bar. Not only is one of the greatest mixers, he owns one of the greatest living studios in Los Angeles, Larrabee, and one of the best restaurants I've ever eaten at in my life called Verse. So stay tuned for the next TrevBeats show, and our guest will be Manny Marroquin. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the next video.
It's the TrevBeats show and we out.